I'm Chris, I'm an anthropologist. I also work here at Cut as the series editor for 100 Years of Beauty. We just did 100 Years Men. We found a model named Samuel who was a really good sport. We wanted to use all of his hair, his natural hair on his scalp and on his face. No wigs, no extensions, and no fake mustaches or facial hair. Which also explains why we had to shoot this in a really crazy order. So we didn't shoot this chronologically, but rather from hairstyle being longest to shortest, and facial hair longest to shortest too. That's very disorienting, and tons of hair everywhere. All throughout history, we see all these different prescriptions for what men should look like, and we've tried to capture some of those and put them next to each other in juxtaposition in this video. See just how arbitrary that is. The places we looked were a lot of shaving and grooming advertisements. In the 1910s, the end of the Edwardian era, we see these crazy handlebar mustaches that take a lot of time and effort to cultivate. That was a time where men really dressed up all the time. There was a lot of occasion and pomp and circumstance. During the 20s, all these advances in industrial production, an expanding economy right before the Great Depression made these little consumer razors really popular. People didn't have to go to the barber and get a straight razor shave. People could actually get a very close shave at home regularly. So it became really in vogue to actually have no facial hair. We chose Clark Gable as our reference for the 30s. He has a very thin, mini mustache that resembles two paintbrushes. Styled men's hair to be very slick, almost sculptural. It's really hard to keep Samuel's hair like this naturally, if I recall. For the 40s, we modeled this image on George Mendonça. So history doesn't really remember his name very well, but he's the sailor that was photographed most famously in Times Square kissing that woman on the street during V-Day. Elvis is an icon. He had amazing hair. So we gave Samuel a pompadour for like white middle class audiences to be exposed to that kind of almost overt sexuality for the time, and male masculine vanity. That was actually pretty revolutionary. For the 60s, we chose a look from an antiperspirant ad. So this is like right after 1968 and the Summer of Love and all of that. And we began to see the kind of commercialization or commodification of hippie culture. Now it's suddenly this very hippie-looking person that he kind of looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo can now sell antiperspirant for people on Madison Avenue. Okay, so where to place the 70s look in history, there's a couple things going on. All around the world, there's a sort of anti-Vietnam War protest zeitgeist. And one of the ways that counterculture had always represented itself was through different bodily practices, not disciplinary bodily practices like shaving every day and cutting your hair and grooming and the like, but kind of wilder, freer aesthetic. For the 80s, we were thinking of this archetypal Wall Street kind of person. This is kind of to reference the explosion of finance capital in New York City and other places in the 80s. We're in Seattle, so of course we had to represent grunge in the 90s. You have to think, like, in comparison with the rest of this men's history, that grunge is an outward statement about not cultivating and perfecting the self, right, in the way that it might have been in the 20s or the 80s. God will never let us forget about this time in the 2000s where everybody described themselves as a metrosexual. So we gave Samuel the kind of prototypical faux hawk. We ended with Samuel's natural look, which is longer hair and a beard, affectionately described as the lumbersexual look, and definitely not rare around these parts in Seattle. I think this video has shown us that this one 23-year-old kid can actually have a whole century of looks inside of him, and he can do that all with his hair.